The real challenge that you have in the Horn is geostrategically crucial. You're right there at the crossroads of the majority of world trade that's flowing, through the Suez Canal. You are immediately adjacent to West Asia, so-called Persian Gulf, which obviously is clearly geostrategically important because we see what's happening there, and the proxy war being waged against Iran very similarly. And then also you have the relationship of the Horn of Africa to the rest of Africa, the other Nile Basin countries. And I think the reality that has always underpinned a lot of U.S. strategy towards Africa, including, very importantly, the strategy towards Southern Africa towards the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa, is that blocks of African nations that have, natural and potentially unifying characteristics from an economic, social, and political perspective, in and of themselves become very dangerous because they can wield power in significant ways, because Africa is an extraordinarily wealthy continent and has a tremendous amount of resources. So I think when you look at the Horn of Africa, what the U.S. sees and what the West sees and what's underpinning their very thought process is, well, this is key geostrategically. This is a key, but it's also a very united region, at least in the possibilities of what could happen there. And if you have Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, obviously this is not happening, but let's just throw the name in there, Djibouti, Sudan, if these countries all start working together more, then they have a lot of power, both in terms of where they're placed, which means that they can affect the flow of commerce, which is the most important thing in a capitalist society, and both in terms of what they can offer. I mean, what does it mean to have the Gerd Dam in Ethiopia that could produce such a huge amount of green energy? I mean, not only is this good for the broader sort of region of the Horn of Africa, which obviously is in an energy deficit, like the vast majority of the world, actually. But on top of that, that's a strategic chip, right? Because in the context of ESGs and the sort of global financial flows, the carbon trading markets, well, you're in a position where, European and American companies, at least in some states, will be benefited by building things and producing things in Africa if it's funded by green energy, because they can get a tax break for it, right? Which then gives the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia particularly, a very strategic role in the latter half of the 21st century, being able to manipulate the politics of the so-called global North countries, right, by using their energy power. So just the same way that in the 1970s, you saw this became a huge issue when the U.S. was angry at OPEC and had to completely rearrange their Middle East politics because OPEC used their energy power to change their position in the sort of world order, as it were, that this is something that could happen in one of the many factors. So ultimately, that's what it all comes down to. And that's why there's so much demonization of Abiy Ahmed, quite frankly, because he's not the leader that they want, because they want somebody who is ultimately going to be pliable. That's what they had in Meles Zenawi. Meles, who is a very intelligent person and a very savvy leader, understood the global situation 100% correctly. And he understood that if he did basically what the U.S. wanted in terms of isolating Eritrea, if he did what the U.S. wanted in terms of destabilizing Somalia, which has its own history in terms of why that would be, relevant to the TPLF, if he was working like he did, because Ethiopia has a lot of influence in the international arena. People don't really know that, but the history of Ethiopia is big. So in 2004, when it looked like Venezuela under Hugo Chavez was going to get into the Security Council as a temporary member, which obviously for the United States would be a disaster ideologically to have, Venezuela in there making them look terrible. Who did they go to? They went to Meles and they said, can you use your influence to get these Africans not to vote for Chavez because they like Chavez, and get them to vote for Guatemala, completely unbelievable, government of the heirs of genocide heirs that killed hundreds of thousands of indigenous people and have destroyed their country to the point where hundreds of thousands of people have had to flee to the United States, to put Guatemala in there instead is just amazing. But you can see this is what they did when they were trying to isolate Iran and over the nuclear deal. They were going to Ethiopia and saying, you got to help us round up these African countries to go after the Iran nuclear deal. And you got Meles saying, well, listen, we can only be but so open, but yeah, we're not really messing with Iran. We know they're trying to deal with you. We're going to work on your behalf. We're going to get behind that. We're going to move some people. We're going to make some things happen, right? So that's the type of leader they want in Ethiopia. And that's why I think their ultimate strategy is an extreme federalism. I don't really know if they want there to be like a total collapse, because that creates other challenges, especially for Europe, especially vis-a-vis immigration and things like that. But I do think what they want and what they hope, and why you can see what they're dangling. Mike Hammer was there in Ethiopia, and everybody's salivating. Oh, look, things are changing. He's making all these positive statements. Well, look at what he really said. He said about the issue of HR 6600 and the sanctions bills when that was raised. Well, that's a congressional issue. I can't do anything about that. So he basically said, oh, nothing I can do there. When they said the issue of the AGOA coming back, he said, well, what you're doing is helpful, but basically saying, we'll see. So they're dangling in front of Ethiopia the possibility of getting some economic help from the West at a time where negotiations are beginning with the TPLF, or at least potentially, and at a time where the national dialogue process is beginning, and you've got individuals who they're going to be trying to bring together to talk about what the future of the country is going to be. And I think the U.S. wants Abiy Ahmed and the Ethiopian government to acquiesce to a highly, highly federal situation where you wouldn't be able to bring the centralized power of Ethiopia as a country, which is the regional anchor state, to bear as a part of a broader regional strategy, because you'd have so much, competition between the different regions for money, for resources, for opportunities. You wouldn't be able to think in the concept of a more united Horn of Africa, sort of all rowing in the same direction. And certainly you would probably have a demise of, anything in terms of the tripartite alliance. I think it's also relevant to note here that, just after Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud from Somalia goes to Eritrea and sort of, I think surprises everyone on the international scale, given his past statements about Eritrea, that just after that, the U.S. Congress then starts to push forward a process of de facto recognition of the breakaway region Somaliland, which to me also, speaks to the same overall purpose. So again, I've said a lot, but to go back to the basic point, the basic structure of U.S. politics, the only way you can succeed in American politics if you want to be in a big scale, is to take this base level foundation that the U.S. is the most powerful country. It's going to have the world's most powerful military. It's going to be able to annihilate every single other country with nuclear weapons. And it's going to use that as a club to say the rules-based international order is determined by us, and you either follow our rules or you will be crushed underneath us. And everything else flows from maintaining that core reality, and every other policy, no matter how crazy it seems, because so many of the things they're doing are crazy. I mean, they're starving people to death with sanctions all around the world for no reason at all. People who are like, we want to trade with the United States. We want to have cultural relations with the United States. We want to be working with you. We have no problem with you. We just want to do it on our own terms. So no matter how weird and blinkered and crazy it seems, it's because it's for a goal that is not logical. It's for a perverse goal, which is to enrich a handful of people in the United States and turn their interest into the so-called national interest and impose those on the entire rest of the globe. It was said very well by Thomas Friedman, who is a terrible person who agrees with all of these things, but he was right about this. He said, McDonald's does not work without McDonnell Douglas, who makes the F-16. U.S. international power does not work unless it has this massive military machine to impose itself on every other country.
Hey everybody, please support independent journalism by going to patreon.com/HermelaTV and becoming a member. Thank you so much for your support.